Ever looked at a perfectly clear lake and wondered, what intricate depths lie beneath? What incredible unseen structures support everything right there on the surface? Well, today we're kind of diving in just like that. But instead of water, we're plunging into the seemingly dense, maybe a little intimidating, but absolutely vital world of professional standards in accounting and auditing. That's right. Our mission today is a real deep dive into those foundational professional standards, the ones that meticulously guide accountants and auditors, making sure there's integrity and trust in financial information, really all across the globe. We've pulled together a stack of expert excerpts, pretty comprehensive, insightful stuff, detailed too, that break down these standards into their core components. Think of it as maybe your express lane to being incredibly well informed on a topic that honestly underpins so much of our global economy.
Exactly. And our goal, our mission for this deep dive, is to truly demystify these crucial guidelines for you. We want to pull back the curtain, help you understand their fundamental purpose, clearly define who they apply to, and maybe most importantly, explain why they're absolutely essential. Essential for maintaining trust, integrity, the whole system, really, in the financial world. Our aim is to make every single part of this, well, intricate system not just understandable, but maybe even genuinely engaging.
Okay, so get ready. You're going to gain a profound appreciation for the professional bedrock that supports financial credibility worldwide. You'll walk away with a crystal clear picture of what makes financial information reliable. And honestly, you might even find yourself looking at an audited statement with a completely new understanding of the immense professional rigor behind it all. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. When we talk about accountants, it's easy to picture someone, just crunching numbers for tax returns or maybe auditing a massive publicly traded corporation. That's the common image, right? But the reality, as our deep dive sources meticulously detail, it's actually a much, much broader array of professional services. Accountants operate within a truly vast landscape of responsibilities. It extends far beyond those sort of common perceptions. For instance, an accountant's role might involve a traditional audit. Okay, sure. But even within that, there are distinct categories. They could be auditing publicly traded companies, often called issuers, right? Their stock is available for you to buy on exchanges like the NYSE or NASDAQ.
Right. The big names often come to mind there.
Exactly. Or they might be auditing private companies, known as non-issuers. Maybe a large family-owned business, or perhaps a high-growth startup that just isn't publicly traded yet.
Yeah, still significant businesses, just not on the public markets.
But the scope doesn't stop with corporate entities. Accountants also play this critical role in governmental audits, making sure taxpayer money is allocated and spent appropriately.
Which is hugely important for public trust.
Absolutely. Or auditing not-for-profit organizations, providing assurance that, charitable donations are handled with the utmost care and used as intended. And a vital area, often overlooked, I think, is the auditing of employee benefit plans. Their work there directly impacts the financial health and security of, well, your retirement savings, potentially.
That's a really key point. And what's crucial to understand here is that each of these diverse engagements, whether it's a multi-billion-dollar public company audit or, say, a review of a local nonprofit's financial statements, it isn't a free-for-all. It's not some kind of ad hoc financial investigation.
Right. Not just making it up as they go along.
Quite the opposite. Every single service an accountant performs requires them to diligently follow specific ethical guidelines and professional standards. For example, our sources explicitly state that an audit engagement absolutely requires the auditor to perform that audit in accordance with what are known as Generally Accepted Auditing Standards, GAAS for short.
GAAS.
And these standards aren't just suggestions, they are the bedrock. They're the fundamental rules that ensure consistency, reliability, and comparability across different engagements and even different firms.
So it ensures everyone's playing by the same rules, essentially.
Think of it this way. Imagine a professional sport, like, say, the Olympics. You've got many different disciplines, gymnastics, swimming, track and field, and each one has its own meticulously detailed rule book. Very specific rules.
Sure.
You wouldn't expect a gymnast to follow swimming rules when they're on the uneven bars. Right?
No, that would be chaos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Similarly, an audit engagement follows a very specific set of GAAS rules. And those are entirely different from, say, the rules for a financial statement review engagement, even if both services are performed by the very same accounting firm. Each service has its own unique professional guidelines. This ensures it's conducted correctly, consistently, and with the appropriate level of rigor for its specific purpose. This differentiation is really key to providing meaningful assurance to whoever is using that information.
And you mentioned GS there, which definitely sounds like a core concept for these audit engagements. We'll be peeling back the layers on what that truly means and how it's structured very soon. It's a term you've likely heard, maybe seen thrown around, and we're going to dive into what it truly means for you, the individual making decisions based on this financial information.
The fundamental importance of these professional standards, honestly, it truly cannot be overstated. They aren't just, bureaucratic hurdles or tedious compliance checkboxes that accountants have to tick off.
Right, it's not just red tape.
Not at all. They are the essential mechanisms that ensure quality, consistency, and most critically, reliability. Reliability in financial reporting and also in the broader landscape of professional accounting services. Without these standards, the financial information you encounter every day would be, frankly, a chaotic, inconsistent mess. It would be impossible to compare anything and utterly untrustworthy.
A financial Wild West, almost.
Pretty much. Consider the impact. If every company could just present its financial results in an entirely unique way, whatever suited them best, or if every audit firm could use its own arbitrary procedures, well, how could you, as an investor, possibly compare two different companies? How could a bank confidently lend money based on financial statements?
You couldn't, really. It'd be guesswork.
Precisely. These professional standards provide that predictable, universal framework. They act as a common language, a set of agreed-upon principles that ensure a certain minimum level of quality, ethical conduct, and transparency is always met. This gives stakeholders, and that's anyone from a potential investor looking at a stock, to a government regulator, to a supplier deciding whether to extend credit, a shared understanding, and a baseline for trusting the information presented. They really build the foundation for efficient capital markets.
So let's bring this home to you, our listener. Why should you care if an accountant follows GAAS or any of these other standards we're going to discuss? I mean, it might sound like insider baseball, a bit technical maybe, but it directly impacts your world. Imagine you're considering investing in a new company, perhaps through your retirement fund. That decision, whether it's a huge multinational or a local startup, relies heavily on the financial information they present.
Absolutely. You're making choices based on those numbers.
Or maybe you're looking to donate to a charity and you want assurance your money is being used effectively, not wasted. These professional standards are precisely what give the public, that's you, me, and everyone in between, confidence in those financial reports.
Confidence is the key word there.
When you see an audited financial statement, or really any other report issued by a professional accountant, these standards ensure there's a predictable, high level of quality, objectivity, and integrity behind it. They prevent that financial chaos we mentioned and foster the widespread trust necessary for a functioning economy. They really are the invisible safety net, the scaffolding that underpins nearly every major financial transaction and decision you might make, from buying stocks to taking out a loan for a house or a car. Without them, the reliability of the information that guides so many critical personal and business decisions would simply evaporate. Okay, so now that we understand the broad importance and, frankly, the sheer variety of services accountants provide, let's zoom in a bit. Let's get into the specific rule books, because it's tempting to think an audit is an audit, right?
It seems simple on the surface.
But our sources make it abundantly clear. Different types of organizations require entirely different auditing standards. It's a much more nuanced world than that. And who's getting audited, and importantly, by whom, profoundly shapes which rulebook applies. Hashtag 2.1.1 statements on auditing standards, SS, for non-issuers. Okay, first up, we have the statements on auditing standards, usually abbreviated as SAS. These are meticulously set by the AICPA Auditing Standards Board, or ASB.
AICPA is the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, for context.
Yeah.
The main professional body.
Right. And the SS provide the generally accepted auditing standards specifically for audits of non-issuers. Now, to simplify, these primarily apply to audits of annual historical financial statements for companies that don't issue stock to the public.
Okay.
So think of a large, privately held manufacturing firm, maybe a significant family-owned business, or even a rapidly growing tech startup that just hasn't gone public yet. They're not listed on a stock exchange.
Got it. Private companies, basically.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just the annual financial statements too, right?
Yes. SAS also provides the authoritative guidance for other services for these non-issuers. For example, the review of interim financial information, think quarterly reports, not just the year-end ones.
Okay.
And also for what are known as comfort letters or letters to underwriters. These are actually pretty crucial documents. They're provided by auditors to investment banks during the process when a company is about to go public, even before it formally becomes an issuer.
Ah, so during the IPO process itself.
Exactly. They're critical because they give those underwriters, the investment banks handling the offering, an additional layer of confidence in the financial data. It goes beyond just the formal statements themselves. It helps the underwriters fulfill their extensive due diligence responsibilities to potential investors.
Makes sense. They need that assurance.
They really do.
Yeah.
So even while the company isn't technically public yet, these SaaS standards are already at play, laying the groundwork for trust as it enters the capital markets. So the key takeaway here is SaaS primarily covers these private companies, the non-issuers. And this naturally raises an important question. Why do private companies need different standards than public ones? Why not just one set of rules for everyone?
Yeah, what's the reasoning there?
Well, the core reason really boils down to the concept of public accountability and the nature of the investor base. Non-issuers generally face different, often less stringent, regulatory oversight because they aren't directly soliciting funds from the general public via stock exchanges.
Okay, their audience is different.
Precisely. Their financial information is often primarily for internal management use, maybe for securing bank loans, or for specific, often sophisticated private investors who might have direct access to management.
Right, they can ask questions directly, perhaps.
Exactly.
Ah.
Therefore, while rigor and ethical conduct are still absolutely paramount, the specific rules and the level of regulatory oversight reflect this difference in their public exposure and the nature of their investor relationships. It's essentially about tailoring the level of scrutiny to the specific context. Hashtag 2.1.2 PCAOB auditing standards. PCAOB-AS for issuers.
Okay, so that covers private companies. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, I think, where a completely different set of rules comes into play, and they're enforced by a very powerful regulatory body, a body that emerged from a period of pretty profound distrust, actually.
That's right. We're talking about issuers now.
Issuers, which are the public companies, the ones whose stock you can buy and sell on exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. For these companies, the auditing standards are set by the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or PCAOB.
The PCAOB, a name many might recognize, especially post-Enron.
Exactly. And their standards are known as PCAOB Auditing Standards, or PCAOB-AS. Just like SaaS for non-issuers, PCAOB-AS provide generally accepted auditing standards for audits of annual historical financial statements for these public companies. And they also cover the review of their interim financial information, like quarterly reports.
But the origin of the PCAOB is absolutely critical context here. It was established in the, well, tumultuous wake of major corporate accounting scandals in the early 2000s. We're talking Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, names that really shook confidence.
Big scandals, big headlines.
Huge. These scandals severely eroded public trust in the audits of publicly traded companies. It led directly to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, often called SOX.
Right, SOX is a big one.
And the PCAOB was formed as a direct and, frankly, aggressive response to that crisis. Their primary unwavering focus is investor protection. That's their mandate.
Investor protection?
Their job is to oversee the audits of public companies, specifically to safeguard investors and ensure the integrity of the U.S. capital markets. So if you're thinking about investing in, say, Apple or Microsoft or any large corporation whose stock you might consider buying, you need to know that their auditors must meticulously follow PCAOB-AS.
So it's a higher level of scrutiny because the public is directly investing.
Precisely. It ensures a consistent, exceptionally high level of scrutiny and accountability for companies that rely on public capital. It's a mechanism designed explicitly to rebuild and maintain public confidence in the financial system after that period of profound disillusionment. Hashtag 2.1.3, generally accepted government auditing standards for government and funded entities.
Okay, so that makes perfect sense for private companies with SaaS and public companies with PCAOB-AS. But what happens when the entity isn't a typical business at all? What about, say, a government agency or a state-funded university or maybe a nonprofit that receives federal grants?
Good question.
Do the same principles apply, or does a different rule book altogether come into play, especially given their unique accountability, to taxpayers and the public good?
That's an excellent and crucial distinction to make. For government entities, and importantly, any organization that receives any level of government funding, there's another critical set of guidelines, generally accepted government auditing standards, or GAAS, sometimes called the Yellow Book.
GAAS, or the Yellow Book, okay.
These standards are independently set by the Governmental Accountability Office, the GAO, That's the investigative arm of Congress, essentially.
Ah, okay.
GAAS provides specific guidance not just for financial audits of government organizations, programs, and activities, but also, and this is where GAAS really distinguishes itself significantly, for what are called performance audits.
Performance audits, what does that entail exactly?
Performance audits go beyond just checking if the financial numbers add up correctly. They delve into assessing the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the economy of government programs and operations.
So are they doing things well? Are they achieving their goals?
Exactly. Is the program working? Is it delivering value for the money spent? This is absolutely vital because it helps ensure that taxpayer money is being used responsibly and that government programs are actually achieving their intended goals.
Can you give an example?
Sure. An auditor following GAAS might assess, say, a city's new public transportation project.
Okay.
They wouldn't just verify the financial expenditures, how much was spent on buses or tracks. They'd also evaluate whether the project is being managed efficiently, if it's meeting its stated objectives like reducing traffic congestion, and importantly, if it's delivering value for money compared to alternatives. Or give you a concrete example of a potential finding from such an audit. An auditor using GAAS might discover that a state's bridge repair program was spending, say, 30% more per mile than comparable projects in neighboring states. And the audit would dig into why. Maybe it's due to inefficient procurement processes or unnecessary bureaucratic delays. Such a finding would lead to concrete recommendations aimed at saving significant taxpayer money and improving how infrastructure gets delivered in the future.
So it's really about more than just the money itself. It's about the public good, operational efficiency, and ensuring accountability for how our shared resources are managed.
Precisely. It adds that whole other dimension of accountability for government and government-funded activities. Hashtag NATAC 2.2 Quality Control Standards, SQCS, the firm's internal compass.
Okay, so we've examined the specific rule books for different types of individual engagements, audits, reviews, government work. But an audit or a review isn't just about one person doing a job on one specific day, is it? It's really about the entire firm's commitment to quality, day in, day out, across every single client and every service they offer.
That's a critical point. Consistency and firm-wide standards are key.
And our sources point to the importance of something called quality control standards, or SQCS.
Yes, SQCS.
These standards are also set by the AICPA, and they provide detailed guidance specifically to CPA firms, the accounting firms themselves, on how to establish and maintain a comprehensive quality control system. Now, what exactly does a quality control system entail? It sounds internal.
It is internal, but it has massive external implications. It's a meticulously designed set of internal policies and procedures that the firm implements and maintains. The overarching goal is to provide reasonable assurance the firm consistently complies with all relevant professional standards, adheres to all necessary legal and regulatory requirements, and crucially, that any reports they issue, audit reports, review reports, etc., are appropriate and reliable for the specific circumstances.
So it's like the firm's internal rulebook for maintaining quality across the board.
Exactly. And these standards apply broadly. They apply to all CPA firms that provide auditing, attestation, and accounting and review services. Basically, any firm issuing reports under those other standards we've discussed needs a robust SQCS system. What's really intriguing about SQCS is that it's all about internal assurance. It represents the firm's deep institutional commitment to ensuring that every single engagement they undertake, regardless of how big or small or how complex, meets the highest professional bar.
So how does that work in practice? What does it cover?
Well, it encompasses a whole range of operational aspects within the firm. Everything from how the firm hires, trains, and professionally develops its staff.
Okay, personnel matters.
Right, to how they assign engagement teams to specific clients, making sure the team has the right expertise. How they conduct internal consultations on complex accounting or tricky auditing issues that might arise. How they supervise the work being done. How they monitor the quality of their own completed work through things like internal inspections.
So checking their own homework, essentially.
In a way, yes. A very structured way. And even how they accept and decide to continue client relationships, ensuring they only take on work they are confident to perform and where they can maintain independence. It's really the behind-the-scenes infrastructure that underpins consistency and reliability across all their clients and all their different types of engagements.
That raises an important question then. What are some of the practical, maybe behind-the-scenes mechanisms a firm puts in place under SQCS that directly safeguard the reliability of their reports? How does this internal system ultimately protect the public interest from potential firm-level lapses?
Great question. Well, for example, SQCS mandates things like robust independence policies and procedures. This helps prevent conflicts of interest that could impair objectivity. It requires strong client acceptance and continuance procedures, as I mentioned, to ensure a firm only takes on engagements it's actually competent to perform and where management integrity isn't questionable.
So they might actually turn down work sometimes.
Absolutely. Reputable firms do. SQCS also requires a system for monitoring compliance through internal inspections, where partners or qualified individuals from outside the engagement team review completed work. It ensures that even if an individual auditor, maybe under pressure or through oversight, makes a mistake, there are multiple layers of review, supervision, and quality checks embedded within the firm's operations. These systems are designed to catch and correct potential issues before a report is issued to the public. It's really the reason why you can generally place trust in reports coming from established, reputable accounting firms. They have these robust internal systems in place, mandated by SQCS, to maintain that consistent high level of quality. It ensures their reports are reliable and their professional integrity is upheld. It adds an absolutely essential systemic layer of public protection.
Okay, so far we've focused pretty heavily on various types of audits, public, private, government, but our deep dive sources emphasize that accountants provide other crucial services too. And just like audits, each of these services comes with its own specialized rulebook.
That's right. The landscape is broader still.
And importantly, it's not just about historical financial statements anymore either. The scope of assurance, the things accountants can provide assurance on, is much broader than you might initially expect. Hashtag 2.3.1 statements on standards for attestation engagements, SSAE, for assurance on non-financials. First in this category are the statements on standards for attestation engagements, or SSAE. These are also set by the AICPA. They provide guidance for what are called attestation engagements. Now, what does attestation actually mean in this context? It sounds a bit formal.
It does, but the concept is powerful.
Yeah.
SSAE applies to engagements where the accountant issues an examination, a review, or an agreed-upon procedures report on a specific subject matter, or maybe an assertion about a subject matter that is the responsibility of another party.
Okay, so a subject matter. That sounds very broad.
Yeah.
It's explicitly not strictly about traditional historical financial statements anymore.
Exactly. That's the key point. The versatility of SSE is truly remarkable, and frankly, becoming increasingly vital in our complex, data-driven world. It's not confined to just financial information.
Like what, for example?
Well, think about a company's cybersecurity controls. An SSAE engagement could involve an accountant providing assurance on the effectiveness of those controls. Are their systems robust against breaches and data theft? That's critical information, right?
Hugely critical, especially now.
Or consider the growing demand for sustainability and ESG reporting environmental, social governance factors. An SSAE engagement might involve verifying the accuracy of a company's claimed greenhouse gas emissions, or maybe checking the ethical sourcing practices within its supply chain.
So validating those non-financial claims companies make.
Precisely. It could even cover things like compliance with the terms of a specific contract or adherence to a particular industry regulation. And a very common and critical application is providing assurance on a company's assertion about the effectiveness of its internal controls over financial reporting, often required under Sarbanes-Oxley for public companies, but using SSAE framework.
So internal controls reporting falls under this too.
Yes, often it does. As business becomes more multifaceted and stakeholders, investors, customers, regulators demand assurance on a wider range of information beyond just the bottom line, requiring professional attestation on non-financial data becomes increasingly important.
So for you, the listener, what does SSAE really mean?
It means that SSAE provides the professional framework for auditors, for CPAs, to lend credibility to this diverse range of non-financial information. So when a company claims its data security systems are certified or that its supply chain is truly ethical, an SSAE engagement means there's a qualified, independent professional who has rigorously examined it according to established standards. This gives your concerns about privacy or your ethical investment choices real backing and credibility. It's all about building trust in information that isn't necessarily monetary but is still absolutely critical for making informed decisions in today's world. Hashtags tag 2.3.2 statements on standards for accounting and review services, SRs for unaudited financials.
Okay, next up, we have the statements on standards for accounting and review services, or SRs, often pronounced STARS.
Yes, Yes, ours.
These are set by a different committee within the AICPA, the Accounting and Review Services Committee. SRs provide guidance specifically for unaudited financial statements or unaudited financial information, but only for non-issuers, those private companies again.
That's a key distinction, non-issuers only for SRs.
Right. And this applies to services like the preparation, the compilation, and importantly, reviews of historical financial statements for these non-issuers. It also covers things like preparing or compiling pro forma financial information and financial forecasts for non-issuers. So the word unaudited is right there in the description. What exactly does it mean for financial statements to be unaudited but still fall under stringent professional standards?
That sounds like a bit of a contradiction at first glance.
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it? But it's an excellent question, and it highlights a crucial difference in the level of assurance being provided by the accountant.
Level of assurance.
And
Okay,
an audited financial statement, in this context under SARS, doesn't mean it's unregulated or just thrown together haphazardly. Not at all. It means the accountant is providing a different and generally lower level of assurance compared to what you get with a full audit under SAS or PCAEBAS. Let's maybe break down the three main types of engagements under SRs because that clarifies it.
Okay, first there's a preparation engagement. Here, the accountant is basically engaged by the client simply to prepare financial statements. They use the client's data, put it into the standard financial statement format, maybe help with some accounting principles, but they're explicitly not providing any assurance. They don't even issue a report, usually. The statements will clearly state no assurance is provided.
So just helping format the information.
Essentially, yes, helping management present their information. Second, there's a compilation. This is a step up. The accountant assists management in presenting financial information in the form of financial statements, and then they issue a report. But that report explicitly states they did not audit or review the financial statements and therefore do not express an opinion or any other form of assurance on them.
Okay, still no assurance expressed.
Right. The accountant uses management's data, puts it into a standard financial statement format, applies their accounting expertise, reads the statements to check for obvious errors, but they don't perform procedures to verify the accuracy or completeness of the underlying information. Think of it like maybe a professional chef taking a client's ingredients and assembling them into a beautifully plated dish, but without tasting or critically evaluating the quality of each ingredient themselves.
Got it. Good analogy.
It's a valuable service for businesses that need professionally prepared financial statements, maybe for internal use or for certain third parties, like a bank asking for basic statements, but where those users don't require an audit or review level of assurance. Now, third, and this is a key one, is a review engagement under SRs. This does provide some assurance, but it's explicitly limited assurance.
Limited assurance. Less than an audit.
Yes, significantly less than an audit, but more than a compilation. In a review, the accountant performs specific procedures, primarily inquiries of management and applying analytical procedures. Analytical procedures basically involve comparing current financial data to prior periods, budgets, industry trends, and investigating any significant fluctuations or unusual items.
So looking for things that seem off or unexpected.
Exactly. Asking questions, analyzing trends. However, and this is key, they do not perform all the extensive procedures of a full audit. They typically don't confirm balances with third parties like banks or customers. They don't observe inventory counts physically, and they generally don't examine original source documents like invoices or contracts to the same extent.
So less digging required than an audit.
Much less. It's akin to our chef maybe lightly tasting a few key components of the dish to make sure they're generally in balance. And nothing tastes obviously wrong, but definitely not performing a full ingredient by ingredient quality check like in an audit.
Okay, that makes sense.
A review is a really valuable, often much more cost-effective service for many businesses, particularly smaller ones, or those that don't need or perhaps can't afford a full audit. It might be needed, for example, for a bank loan application where the bank requires professionally reviewed financial statements but doesn't insist on a full, more expensive audit. It offers a level of professional credibility and limited assurance without the full rigor and cost of a complete audit.
So even though the level of assurance is different across preparation, compilation, and review,
Right.
SRs ensures that even for these unaudited engagements, the accountant still has to adhere to fundamental professional standards. Things like competence, professional judgment, independence where required, and exercising due care in their work. This gives users some baseline of reliability, even if it's not the high assurance of an audit.
Precisely. It sets the professional bar for those specific types of services.
Okay, we've covered a lot of specific standards for specific tasks. SAS, PCAOBAS, GAAS, SQCS, SAE, SRs, it's a lot of acronyms.
Is indeed.
But this last standard we need to touch on. It feels different. It feels like the moral compass, maybe, that guides the entire profession. Our sources heavily emphasize the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct.
You've nailed it. It absolutely is the ethical foundation.
Also set by the AICPA, this code provides its members, CPAs, primarily with comprehensive guidelines for behavior in the conduct of their professional affairs. But it seems like it's far more than just internal guidance for accountants themselves, right?
Oh, much more. It provides crucial assurance to the public. It's essentially a public declaration by the profession that it intends to maintain incredibly high standards of conduct and that it's committed to enforcing compliance with these standards by its members. And importantly, it applies universally to all members of the AICPA, regardless of what type of service they're performing or where they work, public practice, industry, government, education. Absolutely. And this brings us to an incredibly important question. Beyond all the technical rules we've meticulously discussed, all those specific musts and shoulds for different engagements, how truly crucial is this ethical foundation?
Yeah, how important is the ethics part compared to the technical rules?
The answer is unequivocal. It is the bedrock. It is the absolute indispensable foundation upon which all those other standards we've talked about are built. Without a strong, rigorously enforced ethical code, even the most meticulously crafted auditing and attestation standards would ultimately lose their meaning.
Why is that?
Because their effectiveness relies entirely on the integrity, the objectivity, and the professional skepticism of the people applying them. The rules are just words on paper if the professionals using them aren't acting ethically. The AICPA Code of Professional Conduct is fundamentally about maintaining public trust. Trust in the integrity and the objectivity of the profession as a whole. It's a commitment that really transcends mere technical compliance. It ensures that even when, say, a technical loophole might seem to exist, or a tricky, ambiguous situation arises where the rules aren't perfectly clear, ethical behavior guides the decision-making process.
So it fills in the gaps, in a way.
It does, but it also sets the overarching principles. It addresses fundamental principles like integrity being honest and candid, not subordinating your judgment, objectivity being impartial, intellectually honest, and free of conflicts of interest, professional competence and due care, having the necessary skills and knowledge, and acting diligently, confidentiality, protecting client information appropriately, and professional behavior, conducting oneself in a manner that maintains the profession's good reputation and avoids actions that could discredit it.
Can you give an example of where ethics really comes to the forefront beyond just following the technical audit steps?
Sure. Imagine an auditor, maybe deep into an engagement for a major client. They discover a critical financial misstatement. If revealed right now, it could potentially crush their client's stock price, just days before, say, a major high-stakes acquisition deal is supposed to close. The pressure from the client to maybe delay reporting it or downplay it could be immense.
Huge pressure.
Exactly. The ethical code, particularly the principles of integrity and objectivity, ensures that the auditor prioritizes their responsibility to protect the public trust and the integrity of financial reporting over client pressure or personal gain. It's that invisible backbone, that moral imperative that mandates doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. That's what allows the financial markets to function with credibility.
Wow.
Precisely. So, for you, our listener, this code is truly a profound promise to the public. It means that when you deal with a professional accountant who is an AICPA member, whether they're preparing your taxes, auditing a company you invest in, or reviewing a financial report you rely on, they are bound not just by a commitment to technical compliance with all those standards we discussed.
SAS, PCAOB, etc.
Right. But they're also bound by an unwavering commitment to ethical conduct, guided by this code. It is the core reason why you can generally place your trust in the financial information and the professional services they produce. It ensures that competence is coupled with character. That's the essence of being a professional.
Okay, let's unpack this even further now. We've talked about all these different standards. You might logically think all professional guidance kind of carries the same weight, right? A rule is a rule.
That would seem logical, but it's not quite how it works in auditing.
Right. Our sources lay out a crystal clear hierarchy, specifically for audit guidance within generally accepted auditing standards, or GA. This structured hierarchy seems absolutely key to appreciating the depth of an auditor's responsibility and, importantly, how they exercise professional judgment in practice.
It really is key. It guides everything.
We're talking about three distinct levels of audit guidance here. They move from the most authoritative, which are essentially mandates, things you have to do, down to the least authoritative, which are more like helpful resources or background reading.
Exactly.
And knowing which piece of guidance holds which level of authority is absolutely critical for auditors when they're exercising their professional judgment, especially in the myriad complex situations they face. It really guides their decision-making at every turn.
This hierarchy is very much like a tiered legal system, specifically designed for auditors.
Yeah.
At the very top, you have the laws they must follow. These are the non-negotiable mandates. Think of them like statutes.
Okay, the absolute must-dos.
Then there are strong recommendations, which function almost like established legal precedents or regulations. You generally have to follow them, and deviating requires significant and very well-documented justification.
So very strong suggestions, nearly mandatory.
Precisely. And finally, at the bottom, there's helpful advice and supplementary materials, maybe like legal commentary or academic articles. They provide context and insights, but they don't impose direct requirements on conduct. This structured approach doesn't just dictate what an auditor does in a robotic way. It provides a crucial framework for professional judgment. It allows for necessary flexibility in rare, justifiable circumstances, while simultaneously maintaining rigorous accountability through required documentation. It prevents arbitrary decisions and ensures a consistent, high-quality approach even when dealing with complex, often unique audit situations.
So for you, the listener, understanding this hierarchy helps you truly appreciate the immense rigor involved, the thoughtful judgment, the accountability inherent in the auditing profession. It's clearly not about mindlessly ticking boxes on a checklist. It's about deeply informed, ethically guided judgment applied within a very meticulously structured framework. All right, so at the absolute pinnacle of this hierarchy, representing the most authoritative level, are the standards themselves. The Statements on Auditing Standards, SAS, for non-issuers, and the PCAOB Auditing Standards, PCAOBAS, for issuers. These are the absolute core of auditing practice.
The top tier.
Our sources specify that auditors must use professional judgment in applying these standards to a particular engagement. And importantly, they must be prepared to justify any departures from what are called presumptively mandatory requirements within these standards. We'll get to what that means.
Justification and documentation are key themes here.
So this top level, level 1, is further refined by the specific language used within the SAS and PCAOB-AS themselves. First, we have what are called unconditional requirements.
Unconditional.
These are explicitly identified by unequivocal words like must or is required. When you see those words in the standard, it indicates an unconditional requirement that must be followed in all cases where that requirement is relevant. There are absolutely no exceptions permitted here. Zero wiggle room.
That means literally no ifs, ands, or buts. These are the fundamental non-negotiable rules for the auditor. Think of them as the absolute commandments of auditing practice. If the standard says an auditor must do something specific,
They just have to do it, period.
there is no permissible way around it. For instance, a fundamental standard might say an auditor must obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence to support their opinion. There's simply no scenario where that overarching requirement can be sidestepped or ignored. It's a foundational principle that underpins the entire audit process and ensures a baseline level of reliability in the auditor's conclusions. These are the true absolutes.
Okay, that's clear. But then we have the second type within level 1, presumptively mandatory requirements.
Presumptively mandatory. A bit more nuance here.
These are identified by the word should. The standard says the auditor should do something. Now, this indicates a presumptively mandatory requirement, which again must be followed in all relevant cases, except, and here's the key part, except in rare circumstances.
Rare being the operative word.
And crucially, those rare circumstances aren't just a free pass for auditors to decide, I don't feel like doing that today. The conditions for departing from a should requirement are extremely strict. Our sources lay them out.
Yes, there are specific hurdles.
First, there must be appropriate justification for the departure, a really good reason why following the should isn't appropriate or possible. Second, the auditor must perform sufficient alternative procedures to achieve the intent of the original requirement, even if they didn't follow the exact procedure. And third, critically, all of this, the justification, the alternative procedures performed, and how they achieved the objective must be thoroughly and meticulously documented in the audit work papers.
Documentation, documentation, documentation.
So it's definitely not a free pass at all. There's an incredibly high bar for straying from a should when it appears in these top-tier standards. How does that flexibility actually work in practice? It seems like a fine line to walk.
It is a fine line, and you've hit on a fascinating and absolute critical point, because this is precisely where true professional judgment comes into play. But importantly, it's judgment exercised under incredibly strict scrutiny. This allowance for departure under these specific conditions is designed to balance the need for strict adherence to the standards with the inherent complexities and uniqueness of many real-world audit situations.
So it acknowledges that not every audit is identical.
Exactly. While still maintaining absolute accountability through that rigorous documentation requirement. Auditors frequently encounter scenarios that are novel, or where the standard, sort of rote procedure outlined by a should might not actually be the most effective or efficient way to obtain the necessary audit evidence due to the highly specific circumstances of a particular client or a unique transaction.
Can you give an example of when an auditor might justify departing from a should?
Sure. Let's say a standard states the auditor should physically observe the counting of inventory at year-end at a specific warehouse location. But maybe just before year-end, that location becomes completely inaccessible due to a sudden natural disaster, a flood, or a major fire.
Okay, impossible to follow the should, literally.
Right. In that rare circumstance, the auditor could justify departing from the physical observation requirement. But then, they must perform sufficient alternative procedures. Maybe that involves meticulously examining subsequent shipping records and sales data for that inventory, reviewing the warehouse's perpetual inventory records if they were preserved, perhaps conducting detailed video interviews with warehouse personnel who were involved earlier, and analyzing gross profit margins to see if they make sense.
So finding other ways to get comfortable with the inventory number.
Exactly. Finding ways to achieve the same audit objective, verifying the existence and maybe the valuation of that inventory through different means. And crucially, they would have to document everything. Why the physical inspection wasn't possible, natural disaster, exactly what alternative procedures they performed, the evidence they gathered from those procedures, and their conclusion that these alternative steps were sufficient to achieve the objective of the original should requirement.
Wow, okay, so it's a lot of extra work and justification.
It absolutely is. The requirements for appropriate justification, performing sufficient alternative procedures, and thorough documentation mean that this flexibility is definitely not an excuse for cutting corners or being lazy. If anything, it demands a higher level of critical thinking, professional skepticism, creativity in designing alternative tests, and a clear, defensible rationale for any deviation. It's really about achieving the spirit or the objective of the standard, even if the precise letter of the procedure had to be adapted due to genuinely unique and rare circumstances. And that robust documentation provides a clear audit trail, ensuring complete accountability if any questions arise later regarding the auditor's judgment in that situation.
Okay, that makes the presumptively mandatory concept much clearer. And finally, as top level 1, we also have explanatory material.
Right, the third piece within level 1.
These are indicated by softer words like may, might, and could. The sources say this type of language indicates explanatory material that does not impose a professional requirement for performance. So these are really like helpful tips, maybe background context or examples provided within the standards themselves to aid understanding, but they are not strict rules you absolutely have to follow. They enrich the auditor's understanding, but aren't mandates like the musts or even the shoulds.
That's a perfect summary. They provide context, illustrations, and considerations, but they don't create requirements.
Yeah.
All right, moving down one step in the hierarchy, we arrive at level 2, interpretive publications. Now, these are not considered auditing standards themselves, which is an important technical distinction from level 1.
Okay, not standards per se.
But they're incredibly important in practice. They're essentially detailed recommendations on how the SaaS, those top-tier level 1 standards we just discussed, should be applied in specific, often complex or niche, real-world situations.
So they interpret the main standards.
Exactly. And the auditor has a clear responsibility regarding this level 2 guidance. The auditor should consider the guidance provided by these interpretive publications in planning and performing an audit. And, similar to the shoulds in level 1, if they decide to depart from this level 2 interpretive guidance, they must be able to explain any departures and demonstrate how compliance with the underlying objectives of the level 1 standards was achieved otherwise.
So still a requirement to justify departures even though they aren't standards.
Yes, the burden of justification remains, reflecting their importance. To give you some concrete examples, interpretive publications include things like official auditing interpretations of GI issued by the ASB, certain exhibits attached to the GI standard themselves, Auditing guidance found in the detailed AICPA audit and accounting guides for specific industries or topics, and also AICPA auditing statements of position, SOPs, although those are less common now.
Okay, so things like industry-specific guides.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these Level 2 publications are like detailed application guides or maybe comprehensive FAQs for auditors. They help auditors navigate the nuances of real-world scenarios that might not be explicitly spelled out in the broader top-tier standards. They offer practical pathways to compliance in tricky areas.
So they help apply the general rules to specific situations.
Exactly. While they aren't mandates in the same way as Level 1 musts or shoulds, ignoring relevant Level 2 guidance would absolutely require robust justification. Why? Because they represent the profession's consensus view on how the top-tier standards are best applied in practice in those specific circumstances. They provide a really significant roadmap for navigating common and sometimes uncommon audit challenges. They help streamline the application of broad principles to specific, often unique factual scenarios, and they play a big role in promoting consistency across the profession in handling those issues.
Okay, and finally, we reach the base of our GAAS hierarchy, level 3, other auditing publications. Our sources are very clear here. These have absolutely no authoritative status, none.
Zero authority. That's key.
But, as the sources state, they may be helpful to the auditor in understanding and applying the authoritative guidance from levels 1 and 2. And interestingly, the auditor's stated responsibility here sounds similar, at least on the surface, to that for level 2 interpretive publications. The auditor should consider the guidance provided by these publications in performing an audit, and they should be able to explain any departures and how compliance with the actual standards was otherwise achieved.
The wording on responsibility is similar, but the weight is vastly different.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, level 3 is like a useful articles you might read in professional journals, maybe materials from continuing education courses or even auditing textbooks. Great for learning, great for understanding. They certainly contribute to an auditor's overall knowledge base, but they're definitely not the law. They aren't even a strong recommendation like level 2 that you really have to justify deviating from in the same way. Is that right?
That's exactly right. They are purely informational and educational.
But if they have no authoritative status, how does that requirement to be able to explain departures really work? It seems a bit strange to have to justify departing from something that isn't a rule in the first place. Does that create a risk of inconsistency if some auditors rely heavily on, say, a journal article while others ignore it?
That's a very perceptive question, and it speaks volumes about the importance of professional judgment and continuous learning within the profession. You're absolutely right. These Level 3 publications have no authoritative status whatsoever. Examples include exactly what you mentioned. Auditing articles found in professional journals like the highly respected Journal of Accountancy, articles perhaps in the AICPA letter and newsletter, various continuing professional education, CPE materials that auditors constantly use to maintain their licenses and stay current, and of course auditing textbooks and other similar publications.
Yeah.
They absolutely do not dictate how an audit must be performed. The emphasis here for Level 3 is purely on aiding an auditor's understanding and informing their professional judgment, rather than providing any specific mandates or even strong recommendations like Level 2. The potential risk of misinterpretation or inconsistency you highlighted is precisely why the responsibility is framed carefully. The auditor should consider them, meaning be aware of relevant thinking or emerging issues discussed in these publications. But the crucial part is the second half of that responsibility, being able to explain departures and, critically, how compliance with the higher level authoritative standards, levels 1 and 2, was otherwise achieved.
Okay, so the accountability always ties back to levels 1 and 2.
Always. It means auditors can use these Level 3 resources effectively to gain valuable insights, learn about developing best practices, or understand emerging issues and technologies, but their ultimate accountability, the standard against which their work is judged, is always the authoritative guidance in levels 1 and 2. These Level 3 publications foster a vital culture of continuous learning and professional skepticism. They enhance an auditor's ability to perform their duties effectively and with the most up-to-date understanding of the profession and the business world. But they serve as supplemental wisdom, perhaps food for thought, definitely not gospel. It's all about enriching the auditor's professional toolkit without binding them to non-authoritative methods or opinions expressed in these varied materials. The hierarchy ensures clarity on what truly constitutes the required standard of performance. #outro.
And just like that, wow, we've navigated the intricate, yet as we've seen, incredibly logical and absolutely foundational world of professional standards in auditing and attestation. That was quite a journey.
It certainly covers a lot of ground, doesn't it?
From the broad landscape of all the different engagements an accountant can perform, through the specific rulebooks like SAS for private companies, PCAOB, AS for public ones, GAAS for government, the firm's own SQCS for quality, SAE for those non-financial attestations, and SRs for unaudited work.
Don't forget the code of conduct.
Absolutely, all the way to that overarching ethical framework of the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct, and finally, diving deep into that fascinating GAAS hierarchy with its levels of authority. You've just taken a really comprehensive journey, hopefully, through the invisible structure that ensures reliability in the financial world.
And what we've explored today, it truly is the bedrock. It's the foundation of trust and reliability in financial reporting and all forms of professional assurance. These standards, they aren't just technical manuals collecting dust on a shelf for accountants. They are, in a very real sense, the guardians of public confidence.
Guardians of public confidence. I like that.
They protect investors by demanding transparent and accurate financial information. They safeguard the public interest by holding professionals accountable to high ethical and performance standards. And ultimately, they uphold the integrity of the capital markets, allowing for the informed decisions that drive our global economy. Without this meticulously crafted and, importantly, constantly evolving framework, the financial world would be a far more uncertain, far more precarious place for absolutely everyone involved.
And now, hopefully you, our listener, have a much clearer and maybe deeper understanding of that invisible scaffolding we talked about at the start. The structure that supports the credibility of financial information and the rigorous professional conduct expected of accountants. You've gained, I hope, a crucial insight into what really goes on behind the scenes of those audited statements and professional reports you interact with, maybe every day. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave you with a provocative thought, something that builds on everything we've discussed today. We've talked a lot about standards for financial data, historical financial statements mostly. But data, as we all know, is rapidly expanding far beyond just traditional numbers on a page.
The world is changing incredibly fast.
Exactly. Consider the explosive growth of artificial intelligence, blockchain technologies, complex climate reporting, and ESG metrics. These areas generate vast amounts of non-financial data, data that's often opaque, maybe hard to verify, yet increasingly critical for investor decisions and for public trust.
Absolutely critical information is shifting.
So, given this rapid pace of technological change and the emergence of these entirely new forms of information, how might these professional standards we've discussed, especially those subject matter attestation standards, the SSEs, how might they need to evolve? How can they remain relevant and continue to ensure trust in areas like just throwing ideas out, say, a company's assertion about the ethical sourcing algorithms they claim to use for their supply chain, or the verifiable accuracy and completeness of a blockchain-based transaction record for something like a carbon credit?
That's a truly profound and forward-looking question, and it really poses a significant challenge and opportunity for the profession. The core principles we discussed, those embedded in the Code of Conduct, integrity, objectivity, professional competence, due care, those will undoubtedly remain paramount. They are timeless. But the application of these fundamental principles to entirely new, often highly technical subject matters, that's where the evolution will need to be most dynamic.
So auditors need new skills?
Definitely. Auditors, assurance providers will absolutely need to develop significant expertise in these new technologies and diverse data types. They'll need to understand AI algorithms, blockchain protocols, climate science metrics, and more, not just at a surface level, but deeply enough to provide meaningful assurance.
So pushing this further, what new unconditional requirements, those musts or maybe presumptively mandatory guidelines, the shoulds, might we actually see emerge in the coming years? As auditors navigate a world where ensuring data integrity goes far, far beyond just checking the numbers on a traditional balance sheet,
It's fascinating to speculate.
will there eventually be specific standards, for example, for auditing the fairness or bias within an AI's decision-making process, or verifying the true immutability and security of a particular blockchain ledger, especially when these become critical components of a company's operations and its trustworthiness in the eyes of the public and investors?
It's a fascinating future to consider, isn't it? A future where that invisible scaffolding of professional standards will undoubtedly have to adapt, expand, and perhaps be rebuilt in some areas to support entirely new pillars of public trust in a rapidly changing informational landscape. The need for trusted, independent assurance isn't going away. The subject of that assurance is just getting much broader and more complex.